Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started because I know we have just until 3. First of all, thanks for choosing our session. Excited to see all of you here. I was really sad to see that we were pitted against the climate change session because that looked like a really great session too, but I'm very glad that the sessions are being recorded, and I look forward to watching that session later. Again, my name is Heidi Manley, and I'm the Chief of USA Study Abroad at the U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. And I have a great PowerPoint that I'd like to give credit to one of our student interns who put this together for me as part of my trip here. So I want to thank Don, wherever he is, for doing this for me. So just quickly about my bureau, the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs within the U.S. Department of State. We are a bureau that solely exists and is dedicated to the exchange of people. The people traveling from the United States overseas, as well as bringing international students, scholars, artists, sports figures, and you name it, we probably have a program for it, to the United States. So we usually have about 40 to 50,000 people that we support every year through our program. About 15,000 of those are American citizens. We have a very strong diversity statement in my bureau. We've had it since the early 2000s. That really talks about how we strive to make sure that our programs are reflective of the American society that we represent, as well as to make sure that international visitors to the United States get a sense of the United States and don't just go to Las Vegas or New York or the other cities that you might hear about. So I did a quick snapshot of what it looks like for U.S. student flows to Oceania over the past 10 years. So you'll see, and Don did this in percentages, which is fine, that the percentages up until 2019-20 were hovering just about between 3 and 5%. And then there was quite a nice jump in 2019-20 where more American students came to the region. I will say most of those come to 2 countries, Australia and New Zealand. Australia is actually number 5 overall of top hosting destinations for American students, and New Zealand is number 11. Now, inbound to the United States is bigger, and you'll see that the number of students from Oceania coming to the United States actually increased just over 33% over that 10-year period. Again, the leading countries of origin are Australia and New Zealand, with Tonga coming in 3rd, which I think is a great representation, 186 Tongan students to the United States over that period. You've heard a lot about the Gilman program, so I won't go through all the details again. I will point out that Chandra at the University of Otago, I just found out, is a Gilman alumna herself, who came to, oh, sorry, did I misrepresent your university?
I'm an alumna of Otago, but I work here.
Yes, who came to, thank you, went to Otago for your Gilman Scholarship Program and now is here with you all in New Zealand. One thing we did, just to highlight for those of you who might not know, Gilman used to have a time limit of 2 weeks to 3 weeks because we wanted to make sure American students were going overseas for a certain amount of time. We actually completely obliterated that because what we found out is when you talk about access and equity, for many students, 2 to 3 weeks is still unreachable for them because they're working, they have family responsibilities. So even that requirement, which we thought 2 weeks, was actually a huge barrier for a lot of American students. So lifting that barrier and removing it actually really opened applications to our program and allowed us to support a much greater number of students. Again, we are very proud to partner with Education New Zealand. Du Bois is here. Thank you, Du Bois. Since 2015 to support more diverse American students coming to New Zealand. New Zealand has a priority on Indigenous students. So as part of their selection process, they really look for American students who can bring those connections to New Zealand. I'm sure Du Bois can answer more questions about that than I can. But this is a really great partnership of common goals in trying to get more American students to New Zealand, and again for New Zealand to bring more diverse Americans to New Zealand itself. So this is the footprint of Gilman. The Gilman program specifically over the past 5 years and the 14 countries represented within Oceania. So you see we go from 200 to a row of zeros. And I'd really love to see those zeros change into some number. I'll even be happy with 1 as we go through. And we really do make a point with Gilman to select on diversity of destinations. Gilman scholars do go on existing credit-bearing study abroad programs. They're not programs that we create. So a lot of this just reflects where countries have strong partnerships with American institutions. So really, for our PNGs and our Marshall Islands and others, it really reflects that the connections, perhaps, aren't there with the American institutions to foster that exchange and mobility for Gilman scholars to be able to go. And I'm always happy to talk to anybody who has interest in that area. I'm going to talk quickly about some programs that we run that are available for entities. So he here is from the US, just so I get a quick sense of it represents a US institution. I realized after I said that I should have clarified what I meant. Anyone here represent a US institution? This will be for you and you. Great. So we have our IDEAS program, which is the Increase and Diversify Education Abroad for US Students, where we provide up to $35,000 to American colleges and universities to create, expand, or diversify their study abroad programs. And this has meant everything from supporting a university in West Virginia, just to pick on Wes, to create their very first study abroad office ever, to working with an Indiana university who is really looking to build programs for a specific major, like a computer science program, to encourage more mobility overseas for their students. We've had 2 grants to Oceania since 2015, and that funding has been about $85,000. A quick tip for those of you who are not representing U.S. higher education institutions in the room, you can actually, if you have a partner that you would like to partner with, you can encourage them to apply for this program and then name you as the partner that they'd like to work with, right? So if the College of Staten Island is of interest for you, then you can reach out to them and say, hey, did you know there's this IDEAS program? The application actually opens tomorrow for us. Wait, yes, sorry. I'm in like a time loop. How about I just say October 26th? And so if you have those partnerships you're interested in developing, then please do encourage your U.S. partners to apply. Again, with our numbers to Oceania so low, we do look at diversity of regions where we're supporting grants. So we'd love to see more programs coming in from Oceania. This year, we're also, for the very first time, doing a model under IDEAS that focuses on Indigenous serving institutions. So versus the $35,000 we usually give, we're going to provide up to $50,000 to an American college or university that represents an Indigenous serving population, whether that's a tribal college or an Alaskan Native school, an Indigenous serving institution, or an Asian American Pacific Islander school. They can apply, either with a partner or not, to receive up to $50,000 for this partnership. What we'd also like to see come out of this, and a requirement, will be resources to help more Indigenous students from the United States study overseas. If you look at American Study Abroad over the past decade, you'll see we've improved in almost every category for race and ethnicity except Indigenous students, which is still around 0.5% and is the same as it's been for a decade. So we really want to look at infrastructure, because what we also hear is a lot of the study abroad programs being offered aren't of interest to Indigenous students, right? So rather than trying to fit Indigenous students into models that don't work for them, how do we think about creating infrastructure for more Indigenous exchange with the United States? So this is something we're really focusing on for this year. We also have our study abroad engagement grants. These are the grants that we provide to US embassies and consulates, as well as Fulbright commissions. So sorry. These are small grants. They're $15,000 for a US embassy for a single country program, $25,000 for a multi-country program, or $5,000 for a virtual program. So I'm not going to put Wes on the spot, but I am, to say that if any of you are interested in thinking about how you do a study abroad partnership program, feel free to talk to me, but also know that funding table will be coming out shortly. We've done everything from capacity building workshops to look at how does credit transfers work. How do you support diverse students overseas? We did a big workshop on mental health and study abroad, which is a huge issue right now. So this program is meant to fit the needs of the host country and make sure that we're not telling other people what to do for study abroad, but they're telling us what makes sense for the context of their country. And these are just a couple of profiles of those ideas. And I'm sorry, I'm catching like a horrible cold. I do not have COVID. I've tested myself like 6 times. So I just want everyone to know that. So we did a couple of samples of what do these programs actually look like in practice. So one example for IDEA is California State University Bakersfield, which is an Hispanic serving institution in the United States, which is creating a number of credit-bearing faculty-led courses to study nursing practices, including in the Federated States of Micronesia. So this is really about having nurses who don't tend to travel overseas very often to be able to learn comparative healthcare systems, to bring those practices back to the United States, but also to better serve diverse populations within the United States through nursing and medical health care. This is older. In 2016, we worked with the Fulbright Commission in New Zealand to do a number of workshops in Wellington and Auckland on building academic partnerships and exchanges between US and New Zealand, working on research and design of medical applications. Sorry. You'll see we worked with 3 American universities to deliver these training workshops. I don't know if any of you were part of these. No, I'm looking at blank faces, so okay. And then one of the hosts of the events was New Zealand Centre of Research Excellence and Medical Technology here at the University of Auckland, and which also talked about the variety of scholarships that are available, and also to really use this event to showcase specific opportunities that are available in New Zealand for American students. Touching on our Fulbright program. So I had the honor of working on our Fulbright program for about a decade. That was about a decade ago, so I'm a little bit dated. But the Fulbright program is an amazing program. I hope all of you have heard of Fulbright. Okay, not blank faces this time. That's great. That is really, it's our most prestigious program that is really dedicated to binational exchange. So Fulbright kindly pulled these numbers for me of the last Fulbright program year, looking at US student researchers here in some Oceania countries, scholars, specialists, and others. So we talk about the Fulbright program, but it's really Fulbright programs because there's so many different categories under the Fulbright program for students, scholars, professionals, and others to apply to. So if you have not connected with the Fulbright Commission in New Zealand, please do so and learn about some of the rich opportunities that these fully funded programs provide to, again, a wide category of students, scholars, and professionals. This is a program profile. Fulbright partnered with National Geographic a number of years ago to really look at the storytelling aspect. And of course, National Geographic is very well known for their beautiful photos and beautiful stories about the world. And we had Abby McBride, who spent the Year of the Bird, which was National Geographic's, in New Zealand, really reporting on the efforts here to reverse centuries of harm towards birds that make their living from the ocean. So this was an amazing opportunity that Abby had to really showcase New Zealand through this partnership with National Geographic. And that's all I have. So I will turn it to Wendy, and I think we'll all take questions at the end. So again, thank you all so much for being here today.
Okay, just give me one moment. This one should be open. So now, I do have some tech embedded in this presentation that might be a bit glitchy, but it's really worth it if it works, so hopefully it does. Thanks everyone for coming along today. Before I start, I really want to acknowledge some of the absolute experts in the room on NCP. I'm looking at you as I speak, so if there are questions in the question and answer section that I can't answer, I know that we have some experts here who can. I'd also like to point out, I will be talking about the New Colombo Plan funding in particular, but I'm not from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, so I'm speaking very much from the perspective of my home university, which is James Cook University, and the way that we work with the NCP program is really what I want to focus. But before I start, something very traditional at Australian universities and James Cook University, any presentation that we give, any discussion or meeting that we have, we like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands and waters on which our campuses are located, and pay our respects to elders and ancestors, past, present and emerging. And I'd also like to acknowledge the amazing reception that we've had here today too, from the traditional owners on the lands of the University of Auckland. So, New Colombo Plan, these are not as graphically beautiful as some of Heidi's slides, but I really did put the text on here so that if anyone does want to take photos as we go, you can review it later. I'm not going to be reading it out in detail, but the New Colombo Plan is certainly one of the most significant initiatives in Australia's history in terms of engaging more in terms of our students going abroad. It's designed to really deepen our relationships in the Indo-Pacific by specifically supporting Australian undergraduate students to study and undertake internships in the region. You can see what the intended outcomes there are there, and it's really about ensuring that we can engage meaningfully with our near neighbours and in our region. The New Colombo Plan locations, you can see there on the screen, there are 40 of them. I'm not going to read them out. You will note that currently New Zealand is not on that list, but that kind of thing is always open for discussion. So just to note that these are the countries that are included in the New Colombo Plan at the moment. I will probably switch between New Colombo Plan and NCP. In Australia, we always just refer to it as NCP, so if I slip up on that, please just excuse me. It was established in 2014. It supports approximately 10,000 Australian students to go abroad each year. And in recent years, there has been a particular focus on engagement with the Pacific. Just hot off the press, as of this morning, I had a text from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. The budget that Bronwyn mentioned in her presentation that was tabled last night has included the $45 million investment in the New Colombo Plan for the 2023-24 year. And I'd also wanted to highlight that there is currently an active roundtable group working with government, with Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, that includes current students, alumni, other stakeholders. We've also got some peak bodies and providers who work in this space, all regularly meeting. At the moment, it's about quarterly to discuss current issues, potential program modifications or improvements. So it's a really a space where government is really actively engaged with the delivery and the deliverers of the program. It is a 3-phase program, so there is a scholarship program, a mobility program and an alumni program. The scholarship program, there are 120 scholarships available. Now I'm speaking on the 2023 round. There may be changes for future rounds. It's important to note that there are adjustments each time, but in the most recent round it was 120 scholarships, and I loved how much diversity was coming through when you were talking about some of the aims of your programs, Heidi, because that's certainly a really clear aim of the NCP programs as well, both in diversity of students engaging in this program, but also in the diversity of the programs that they undertake and the disciplines that they're working in. Traditionally, with the Scholars Program, we could nominate 10 nominees per university, so it really is trying to enable that access through ensuring that everyone's on the same field, no matter how many students they have enrolled. And in this last round, we could actually nominate up to 15 nominees. It is quite an intense process, both for the university and for the students going through the grant process, but it is absolutely incredible if you're a recipient of the NCP Scholarship Program. You can see that students can study language training and an internship for up to 19 months in the program. As I said, it's really competitive and rigorous, and the actual amount awarded to each student varies dependent on the program and what it contains. And I believe we've got an expert on the Scholars Program in the room. It can include a primary and a secondary location, and it has a really active alumni community. So that's a real benefit to people who've participated in this program. There are active alumni events happening constantly, and students have access to really high-level engagement with both industry and other alumni. The mobility program is probably has the largest level of participation. It's not limited to 120 students. And it's really about, again, providing the opportunity for students to study and undertake internships, but also includes things like practicums and research in it. Universities manage the grant distribution, actually all of the grant management once the grant is awarded, and the grant application process. And there is a small administration amount provided to universities when they receive a grant to help with that management. It's a lot of work though, but it's absolutely worth it. It's definitely designed to encourage innovation and also working with private sector organisations and the business community in the locations that we're working, but in Australia as well. It must be for a minimum of 14 continuous days, so we still do have the 2-week minimum in our program. It must be for credit. I haven't included all of the provisions on here. This is really just meant to be a snapshot, and I've provided the links to this if it's of any use to you. You're welcome to go and have a look afterwards. It cannot be undertaken at an offshore campus of an Australian university. I think that's really important to note. Australian universities have expanded to transnational options with increasing numbers, and so there's a really a designed part of this program that is about engaging with university partners like USP. And grant amounts vary dependent on the duration, so between 1,500 to 7,000 for up to a semester. The alumni program, lots of text, I know, but don't worry, I'm not going to read it all out. Just the provisions to become an ambassador are that you must have been a participant in either the Scholar program or the Mobility program. You need to have some contact with your home university, and you don't have to be currently studying, because we know a lot of students undertake these programs towards the end of their studies. So as long as they have that connection, students can, or ex-students can still be nominated as an ambassador. And there's a formal position description. It's actually a really prestigious position to get, and obviously really good for future employability options as well, to say that you were an NCP ambassador. To start to talk about the impact that NCP has had on outbound students from Australia. So in the last time we did a really major data collection, which was the 2020 report based on 2019 activity, because students weren't able to travel much in the last few years, you could see that our participation rates increased to over 58,000 students studying abroad, and that represents 1 in 4 Australian students undertaking a study abroad experience in their studies. This is what I was hoping would work for the technology. So I'll go back to the beginning just so that you can see this, and I would like to acknowledge my colleague Kirk Doyle, who isn't here today, but put all the work into these really beautiful maps for our AUIDF community, the Australian Universities International Directors Forum, and this is based on some of that national benchmarking data that I'm talking about, and we'll share more about as we progress. So it's not going to work again. Oh yes, you can see. So initially you can see that engagement in the Indo-Pacific was, there, but it really increased post the 2017 period, and continues to increase as the reports are produced each year. Now, this is where it glitched, so I'm just going to do something here. I'm going to get out of that and go back into here and see if I can make this work. Okay. So another visual for you here is the top 12 countries for learning abroad for Australian students in the Pacific in recent years. So you can see Fiji is certainly very well represented there. And some changing as time goes on about where students are studying, but certainly with a deep and enduring interest in relationships in the Pacific, and Fiji in particular there. You can also see in terms of duration, so I'm going to go back to the beginning for this one because it seems to have started halfway through, but you can see the duration has always been strong in the 2 to 3 week period, but over time, as NCP funding has become something that universities work with more, that 2 to 3 week period has really increased. And a lot of that is also to do with the grants that are provided really work well for a 2 to 3 week program to support student engagement. Okay, a little bit about my context. So James Cook University, we are not the largest university in the country, but we absolutely value the outbound mobility of our students. And we have students that come from some really non-traditional university backgrounds. So we have the second highest level of learning abroad participation nationally. This is based on the proportion of graduating students. So it doesn't mean the largest number, but proportion of graduating students. And the highest proportion of international experiences undertaken in the Indo-Pacific nationally. nationally, which is more than double the national average. We have very high proportions, as I mentioned, of students from non-traditional university backgrounds who, just like Wes was saying this morning, and like myself, may not have even thought of travelling abroad at any point in their life, but particularly by the time they went to university, and may have some other barriers to participation, like financial barriers. We have a few things that aren't really the norm. So we have very high levels of participation with students studying abroad in our health sciences, our science sciences, agriculture and environmental studies. They're our top 3 programs for students to study abroad. And nationally, the highest level of participation is in the business field. So for us, that's on the list, but quite a long way down the list. Our top 5 undergraduate student destinations, I mentioned that deep engagement with the Indo-Pacific, Fiji, Thailand, Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea and Cambodia. I mentioned, so this is one of the pages from our annual report, and any Aussie in the room will recognise this report. I just thought I'd share this particular slide. So when I say that we really are not with the rest of the country in some of the ways that we work with Outbound, this is a really indicative slide. So if you look at how many students are undertaking, the inner circle is the JCU circle, the outer circle is the national circle. Internships, work integrated learning and other practical placements. For JCU at an entire level at 65%, but if we just segment out our undergraduate population, it's actually above 80%. So when you talk about deep engagement with partners, a lot of that work is being undertaken in health placements and working in terms of capacity building with a lot of the countries that we work with in physiotherapy, medicine, dentistry. So it's really meaningful work and definitely not edutourism. I thought I'd just highlight one of our programs. I've got to do a little bit of a plug for some of our amazing champion academics. So this is one of our programs that's currently featured on the NCP site if you wanted to go and read the detail. But this is a long-standing relationship we have with the National University of Laos and one of our academics there who is deeply engaged with that space. And this is a joint program where students from the University of Laos participate with JCU students on these digs that for them are, exactly what they want to be doing in their studies. And as I said, the link there is there. I also need to do a quick plug. Last year, the International Education Association of Australia released a report on learning abroad in Australian universities. And this was designed to get really widespread information out about the value that Australia has on the outbound part of the internationalisation component of what we do. So you can see there's just a snapshot from the website there. There's a photo of the report, but I encourage you to go and download the report. It took many months to put together, and I'd like to acknowledge Wendy Martinek's work on that. She was heavily involved in a group of Australian universities that were working together in this space on the ultimate return to travel for our students. And that is it from me. Thank you. I will put up this one. Yeah. There you go.
Awesome. All right. Kia ora tātou. I do not have a presentation, so you're just going to have to listen to my angelic voice, but that's okay. I'm really excited to talk to you guys today. My name is Wes Jeffers. I am at the U.S. Embassy in Wellington. I'm a U.S. diplomat. I've been a diplomat for 12 years, and I am one of the leads of our public affairs section, meaning that I'm in control of all the different public events, exchanges, educational programs, all of the really fun stuff that we get to do. But mostly, I'm one of the people that is in charge of our small grants program. So the Small Grants Program is something that pretty much every U.S. embassy around the world operates, and we all do it a bit differently. So I'm going to talk to you from the New Zealand and the Samoa context today. But small grants are amazing because I know that many of you, when you go around the world, you see a U.S. embassy and you think, wow, that's a fortress. They have a ton of security. They don't want anything to do with me. That is not true. We love interacting with people, and we love being able to give money to organizations to accomplish mutual goals that the U.S. government has in the different host countries that we operate in. So with the Small Grants Program, essentially every U.S. embassy around the world gets some money from Congress every year that we can implement in ways that we see fit to accomplish our U.S. foreign policy goals in our host countries. So I'll get into some of the specifics of how we do that in New Zealand and in Samoa. But all of you really would be eligible to participate in our small grants programming. So with the small grants program, essentially every year we put out a notice of funding opportunity on our websites. Pretty much every U.S. embassy does this. We all have different deadlines, and I'll get into the New Zealand and Samoa ones. But we put that out on our website. It covers a variety of different topics that we would like to see proposals on. And then you can read that, you write up a proposal. Usually they're around 10 pages. They include things like a problem statement, a budget, kind of a staffing plan, a few other additional details. And then you submit that, and then there's a committee at the embassy that will review the proposals and see what they might be able to fund. And usually these successful proposals are proposals that accomplish kind of U.S. foreign policy goals and that have some kind of connection between the United States and the host country. So in New Zealand and in Samoa, I should say for our timeline for our small grants program, we operate on the U.S. fiscal year. So that means that we begin in October and we end in September. So we're beginning a new fiscal year this month. And currently, we are working on our new notice of funding opportunity at the embassy. We expect that it's going to go up on our website either at the end of this week or by middle or end of next week. So it's going to happen pretty soon. I could read out the actual URL, but it's quite long. So basically, if you just Google U.S. Embassy New Zealand Small Grants Program, the first result will be that page. Or similarly, if you want to Google U.S. Embassy Samoa Small Grants Program. So with our U.S. Embassy New Zealand Small Grants Program, we really focus on programs that affect New Zealand, Cook Islands, and Niue. With Samoa, we focus on programs that affect Samoa. Like I mentioned, every U.S. embassy has some type of small grants program. So we have a U.S. embassy in Australia that really focuses on Australia, as well as a few other Pacific islands. We have a U.S. embassy in Fiji that their program focuses on Fiji. So with the New Zealand program and with the Samoa program, we typically operate on a quarterly basis. So when that notice of funding opportunity goes up, you'll see on the website that there'll be 4 different deadlines listed throughout the year. Typically, it's November, February, May, and August. And so we ask for people to submit proposals by those times. And then after those times, usually the first week of the following month, we have a grants committee, which consists of 4 people. I am one of those 4 people. We read the proposals, and then we decide what we can fund and what we can't fund. We'll either fully fund proposals, partially fund proposals, or unfortunately, sometimes we just can't fund proposals. Every year, if you read on our website, it says that the maximum amount of money that we get as an embassy to use for this program is $350,000. I'll tell you a secret, we actually get quite a bit more than that. But sometimes we're able to use that money for different priorities. But we get a lot of money in this region of the world for the small grants program. And for your proposals, you're able to write a proposal for up to $100,000, US dollars, I should say, which is very good. So with that, we have the 4 deadlines throughout the year. And so you might wonder, what are our priorities that we're really looking for? So in New Zealand and in Samoa, we share one U.S. ambassador, Ambassador Tom Udall. He has 3 very clear, very big priorities that we operate on. One is bolstering Indo-Pacific security. That has a lot to do with our military-to-military relationships, pushing back against mis and disinformation, and keeping things secure in the Pacific. The second is bolstering conservation and pushing back against climate change, mitigating the effects of climate change. So that has everything to do with conservation and climate. And then the final is kind of people-to-people relationships amongst our indigenous groups, especially Maori, Pacifica, Pacific Islander. And that really has a lot to do with, those indigenous relationships between our countries. In addition to that, if you look at our website, once we get the notice of funding opportunity up, you'll see that pretty much anything you could think of is going to fit somewhere. We also, this year, are going to have another priority, possibly titled something like making connections across our blue continent. And that would cover things like diversity, LGBTQIA+, inclusion, and human rights, different topics like that. So you'll see on the website, it's pretty clearly outlined, what we're able to focus on for our priorities. So with those proposals, we have the instructions listed, but there'll be about 10 pages, like I mentioned before, and you'll see clearly what you need to submit. I'm going to go through a few tips before I finish up, just so you have kind of a fighting chance with our small grants program. We do get a lot of proposals every year, and we've actually gotten a lot more just in the year that I've been here. And I would say, I think last year we were able to fund probably around 30 or a little over 30 successfully, which is a great number, but we've received far more than that, definitely double, triple that number that we weren't able to fund. So we get a lot of proposals, but one of our goals at the U.S. Embassy in New Zealand, the U.S. Embassy in Samoa, is to really diversify who we're able to give grants to. One trap that a lot of U.S. embassies fall into is that we give money to the same organizations over and over and over. We're all trying to move away from that now and give money to different new organizations, new people who we think are going to be able to accomplish a lot. Before I get into some of the tips for everything, I did want to mention that some of the things that are not eligible for funding are anything that involves partisan political activities, fundraising campaigns, or anything that supports a specific religious activity. We also can't fund anything that supports construction projects, just specific scientific research, or projects that seek funding for personal use. I will say in the education sphere, we get a lot of grant proposals from academics that want to come to New Zealand to do research. We almost never can fund those. We really need to fund something that has a big impact for both the United States and New Zealand or the wider Pacific. And the most important thing about our proposals, kind of the best tip, but it's also described on the website, is that what we want to see in the proposals is a very strong U.S. component or U.S. connection. That can look like a number of different things. You might have a proposal that involves U.S. government exchange alumni, like Fulbrighters, like Gilman Fellows. You might have a program where you have a connection with the U.S. university or U.S. organization, or perhaps you are a U.S. university and you have a connection with a New Zealand or Pacific university or organization. You also might be using some type of U.S. technology or some type of U.S. training materials, something like that. That can also serve as a really good U.S. connection. But that U.S. component needs to be really well highlighted. And we do entertain proposals from organizations and from individuals in New Zealand, in the Pacific, and in the United States as well. We've gotten a number of proposals from different U.S. universities who have connections in New Zealand or in the Pacific Islands. And that's what we really like to see. And we are able to fund U.S. universities and U.S. organizations as well. So just a couple of tips that I wanted to mention. I just talked about the U.S. connection. I mentioned earlier, you're allowed to apply for up to $100,000 US. If you have a proposal that really needs $100,000 US, go for it. Don't let me stop you. But I will say, I've found in my experience here and in my experience in other countries in the world, it's better if you don't just ask for that top amount just because you want that top amount, because you think you might be able to get it. We only get so much money, and it's kind of unpredictable sometimes exactly how much money we'll get in a given year. So if your project is really just going to cost around $50,000 US, maybe ask for that. Don't just shoot for the 100,000. But then also in your budget, I'm kind of a big stickler for budgets, probably the most out of all the people in the grants committee. It's really good if you can outline, what would work if you get full funding versus if you could only get partial funding. A lot of times we're able to give partial funding, but if it's not clear what we're able to cut from your budget, then we might just say, well, we can't really see what we could cut, so we're just not going to be able to fund it because we don't have time to kind of go back and forth and have longer conversations. So if you can make that clear, what might be able to be workable with your project if you only got partial funding, that's a really good tip. Also, you are very free to run any ideas for proposals past us, those of us that work at the U.S. missions to New Zealand and to Samoa. You know me now. We have Louisa in the front row. Louisa's an expert at grants. She's come up with some amazing grants and worked with some amazing individuals and organizations the past year. We have Veronica with our Samoa team, who's over there. And earlier this morning, I called out Katie and Ron as well. They all contribute to our grants program. They all work at the U.S. missions here. So if you have an idea, you can feel free to email us to set up a call. We cannot go over your proposal. So you can't send us a proposal and ask us to review it in advance for you. Can't do that, but we can, and we're happy to talk about ideas and let you know, I don't know if that would work, or maybe you need to bring up the U.S. connection, just to kind of get you on the right path to success. Those are my biggest tips. Just remember, I think my big takeaway is that the U.S. government does have money that you could be eligible for. You could be a lucky recipient. And we love to fund anything that involves education. I mean, education kind of seeps into all of the ambassadors' priorities that I mentioned and all of our foreign policy priorities. Just as a quick example, last year we were able to give a grant to Appalachian State University, who are working with a Cherokee tribe, who are going to send some Cherokee members here to work with some Maori members of some iwi, and then possibly do a 1 or 2-way exchange. And that's going to be an awesome Indigenous connection. Last year, we also worked with a bunch of climate and conservation organizations on the South Island who were working on bringing a U.S. technology into working on conservation methods on the South Island in New Zealand. And all of these organizations were working with the same technology, but they weren't talking to each other. So one put in a proposal. We were able to bring everyone into a room together and have trainers come in, teach everyone how to use the technology and how they might best work together to eliminate some pests in the South Island and work further on conservation for flora and fauna. But we do so many grants on so many different things, and they're always really, really exciting. We have a huge grant coming up here in Auckland, actually, at the beginning of December, where we're going to have a blue and green technology conference and have a lot of different people working in kind of the green technology space, both in New Zealand and in the United States, come together. And that was a grant proposal. That was one of our bigger grants. But we do very small grants as well for museums, student groups here, all kinds of things. So really, the possibilities are endless, I would like to say. But please know that that's out there. And if you're from Australia, if you're from Fiji, one of these other places I mentioned that has a different U.S. embassy, take a look at their website, see if you might be able to qualify for any of that. If you're a U.S. organization or university, feel free to look at some other U.S. embassy websites too, because we have pretty much the same rules that apply to our small grants programs around the world. It just depends on what our priorities are and where we want to focus. So with that, thank you guys. I'll take a seat and we'll answer your questions.
Okay, I think we have 15 minutes left for, oh, good. I looked at my phone. Any questions that you all may have? Or did we cover everything so well? Or just comments are fine too.
I'll make a comment to kick it off. And Heidi, you and I talked about this at lunch, and it's about a new combo plan. When we designed that program, we talked a lot about alumni and how it's first and foremost an alumni program, because over time you end up with tens of thousands of people. Every year there might be tens of thousands of students, 10,000 students participating, but over time it's 100,000, 150,000 people. So the more money you or the more you invest in that alumni program, the greater that impact is downstream. I just want to make the observation that institutions can do the same thing. I mean, we're all trying to get more students out, but I'm not sure how many institutions are really actually spending a lot of time thinking about alumni. Maybe more in the US than here, or in Australia at least. But I'd just absolutely say that pays dividends where you can get your return students involved and support them.
There was one thing I didn't mention, and I meant to mention, and that's the fact that NCP also has consortium projects. And I thought I would throw to Wendy because she's working on one with ISEF at the moment that you might want to highlight.
Yes, so New Colombo Plan does one of the partnering, the base partnership has to be in Australia, of course. But because ISEP has a number of institution partner members in Australia, we've got 7 partners. We submitted a grant application to work with the University of the South Pacific. So the University of Melbourne is currently the consortium lead, but it allows opportunity for any of the ISEP institutions to opt in, which means that students from the University of Melbourne, students from La Trobe University, students from the University of Southern Queensland, and students from University of Technology Sydney, they've all opted into the program. They're able to participate, and we've got grant money for both $7,000 grants to go to the University of South Pacific for a semester, and we also have 15 $3,000 grants to go for a short-term program to the University of the South Pacific. So it was funding that was given in 2021, and so it's been sitting on the shelf. And getting a little bit dusty. We're dusting it off this year, and the good thing is that they do allow extensions. So we will be moving forward and trying to get that mobility started, because for a lot of Australian institutions, I think it was probably the same for New Zealand. I'm not sure how it was in Fiji, but for a lot of us down under, we weren't restarting mobility until semester 2 of this year, so the second half of this year is when it restarted. So we're looking forward to using that New Colombo Plan money to get students into Fiji. And of course, I've had the opportunity to talk with a colleague, she's here, from the Cook Islands, again, USB Cook Islands, about opportunities for moving forward. So for the Pacific Island nations, there's great opportunity to be working with Australia. And we do hope that someday the funders within the federal government of Australia will see fit to include New Zealand. Probably the United States is still a long shot.
I will say.
I know. It's still, I mean, at one point there was funding available through something called UMAP and then through Endeavor programming for United States partnerships. But certainly at the moment we do have opportunities to be connecting with the Pacific Islands, and that's, we'll take what we can get in terms of funding, and we'll hope for more in the future.
Yeah. Good.
There's some funny question about the Gilman and the small grants programs, and whether there's an opportunity to collaborate across different regions where the benefits or the outcomes of the program would align. So, for example, if we could work with some of our partners in New Zealand and lodge an application for a small grants program, for example, and leverage some of our partners in the US that are similar to really foster that deep reciprocal engagement.
Yeah, for small grants, you could definitely do that. And actually, last year we funded a $100,000 proposal that is from an academic based in New Zealand who's working across the Pacific with a number of academics, one in Australia, maybe one in Fiji, and one in a few other places. And she put together quite a strong proposal for a program all about kind of Pacific security. But we were able to fund that from New Zealand, even though it does reach into the U.S. Embassy territories. But yeah, I mean, if you have relationships with New Zealand and with others around, and you want to put in a proposal, that can actually be really, really strong.
And we support the same for the study abroad engagement grants that I mentioned. And you'll hear Wes's idea of small grants and my idea of small grants. So there might be a little bit of a disconnect there. But it's all small grants, so it makes sense. But we actually prefer regional collaborations, just because if you're going to come all the way to New Zealand, it makes sense to make the most of your time. And we actually have great partnerships that we formed with a lot of the leading U.S. higher education institutions, like the Association of International Education Administrators, or AIEA, which are all the senior international officers, to APRO, which is really focused on credit and registrar's offices. Because like Wes, we realized a lot of the speakers we were using were the same people we kept sending out, and so we really wanted to make sure we were diversifying who we were sending. So we built quite a roster. AIEA calls it ARISE. I should have said that, I can't remember what it stands for. But it's a great way, if you're looking for diverse voices, to come out and talk about matters that are common to both of our countries, to do that. through this program.
Hi, I was just wondering, so what about funding on the other side? So are you aware of any funding opportunities to bring students from Pacific Island nations to study abroad with us? Because, I mean, for us, I'm from Victoria University of Wellington, we get students from like USP in the Pacific, but USP gives them a scholarship to help with funding their travel, and they usually stay with family as well. So it's a similar issue kind of across the Pacific Islands. So I'm just wondering, we want to be reciprocal, how that, like we search for funding to support that ourselves, but I'm just wondering if you have any funding opportunities or ideas around that.
No, I'm not aware, because that would be about the home university of those students helping to fund. Yeah, so I'm not sure about that one.
It's a great question. I mean, we do everything with the context of to and from the United States.
Mm.
I'm not sending students who would come to us, not to you, no, just kidding.
Yeah, no, it's for us in our mobility office. We want to bring them.
Yeah, it's such a great question.
Sorry, I was just curious if there was anything.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I know that we've formulated a lot of programs over the years to bring students to our community colleges from diverse, especially places where there's workforce development issues, to come in and study tourism or healthcare or other issues within the U.S., because that's been a huge focus. A lot of international students that come to the U.S., more than half of them are from two countries, China and India. So this is a deliberate effort to really diversify who's coming to the U.S. by offering, whether it's global UGrad, they're coming at an undergraduate level, or community college, or Fulbright, or other ways to really diversify that context. So it's a great question.
So, and I was more affected, like short study abroad exchange, short
Right.
term. Yeah.
Yeah, most of a lot of these are semester-long programs because these are difficult for people to get away.
Hi, I'm Zina. Actually, it brings me the idea of the APRO, which is I'm supporting the network in the university, including, New Zealand, only one university is part of the APRO, and then now learn about the ISEP, which is more focusing on the study abroad team, which is a high school like leavers, year 12 and 13, and wondering if there will be any opportunity like combined with the idea of a year 13 or 12 from Auckland or New Zealand, and then perhaps using some background in like a relationship with because we've got 11 university from APRO network, and also like 6 university in Australia or New Zealand, but we do not have any like Pacific networks. So those are kind of things, if we kind of build up some relationship, can go for that grant. Do you think it's possible? Based on some established relationship and kind of modify.
For small grants, I feel we'd have to have kind of a deeper conversation for that. We're usually not able to get into more complex ideas like that. We're more, I don't know. Let's talk after. It'll be a good conversation.
It's probably more a comment, and I'd be interested in probably some of the other NCP experts. One thing NCP is for undergraduates, but one thing there is a bit of like an opportunity for postgraduate students as well. And they bring different experiences and perspectives to programs. So, sorry, probably more of a comment than
Point.
I mean, maybe it's a little bit ambitious and naive, but how do you start something like that? Like any grant or any sort of scholarship. I mean, here in New Zealand, we kind of have a real lack of it for our outgoing students, and finance it's a big factor. There are other factors, but finance is a big one. So how do you start something? Like, how did you get a plan or some sort of grant, anything into motion? Because, I mean, I don't, unfortunately, have Jacinda's number on my phone. I'm working.
I mean, for the U.S., our funding comes from the U.S. Congress, and I know a lot of these decisions are made by associations and universities and colleges that meet with their representatives or their senators to talk about this need, which is how Benjamin Gilman had this idea because he served upstate New York. A lot of his constituents could study abroad. He was a big believer, chair of House Foreign Affairs Committee, in having international experiences. And again, he asked for what in the U.S. budget was a modest amount, $1 million, right? Let's just try it and see what happens. So I would say it comes through Congress, but often the commensurs to Congress, I don't know how it works in many of your countries, but are the U.S. colleges and universities, especially those who combine efforts and go and meet as a group, as a collective, and that did happen as I understand it. I wasn't around for Gilman, was where there was a collective that learned and explained this need, because many voices are more powerful than one. But it really, a lot of it comes down to vision and leadership and then convincing others to come along with you. 535 members of Congress, you have to get a number of them to come around to how the money should be spent. So I don't have a magic solution. We've been very fortunate to have very loud voices. I'm not allowed to lobby, but there are others who speak very well on our behalf. And also really arranging our students to go meet with their constituents or their congressmen is very powerful. To have a student like Wes come in from West Virginia and say, this is what happened to me because of these programs, it means a lot. And I will say for most of us, we always say our congressional budget is really built on the U.S. students because those are the constituents, and a lot of it comes around because of the U.S. piece. We send letters every year to say, dear Senator X, these are your Gilmans, dear Senator Y, these are your Fulbrighters, dear House, and that's a lot of work, but it's very strategic on our part to really showcase that this is how these dollars are being spent, and they're being spent on your people.
I just add something to that because I have kind of both perspectives, and we're lucky in the United States that international education is supported by both sides, the Democrats and the Republicans, albeit for different reasons. But it's really encouraging to talk to representatives on both sides who do that. But a lot of the work is, as Heidi said, come from a lot of lobbying from institutions and organizations like NAFSA.
Yeah.
A big part of NAFSA is lobbying to Congress to really tell the story of international education and why it's important. And more this is starting to happen slowly, but businesses also really drive, politics in the U.S. And you have businesses saying, we need graduates from institutions who have international education experiences, and that's what we value to make money and bring money into the country. So I know, we do social license here in New Zealand, but I think we can kind of learn from a few of those things and start to develop that here.
Yeah, and I'll take on from that. In Australia, the new Colombo plan came from the party that was in opposition when they moved into government. Governments have got squillions of people screaming at them for attention. So it's a long play, but if you want to really get someone's attention, I would say have a look at whoever's in opposition here and try to find the people who might advocate for you there. Because they're looking for new ideas, they're looking for something different, so when they're in government they've got something new to deliver. But that's how it works in Australia. Our leadership who was with the foreign minister took that, and that was literally part of their election pitch. So when they got elected, boom, that just came straight out of the gates. So long play, but I will look there.
And to take that further, we're delighted to see that the new government in Australia, many of you may know, we've had a change of government, has continued to support NCP. So we knew that was likely, but it's really great to see that it's now hit the budget and that it will be supported by both parties. The other side of things, I would say, to take that idea further, because that's a really big picture, long play, as you say, Rob. Once something like that does exist, I think the onus is then on the institutions or whoever is the recipient to invest in making sure that you put forward high quality applications. I think any Australian university who's seriously applying for NCP has big blockout periods where we have staff really dedicated to recruiting internally for academic leads for programs. I work with the deans directly to have them tap people on the shoulder and say, right, get that person to put in an NCP program application. And then when the scholars are happening as well, it's the same, very intensive periods where those students are being nurtured and worked with through the teams. So I think it's not just about getting it, but then showing that there's value and that institutions are going to take them up on these opportunities, because in Australia, there's no doubt that these opportunities have been well taken up by institutions. There's high demand for them, and therefore there's a strong impetus to continue something that's been quite successful.
add to that, I was talking to some students a few years ago, and their whole terminology has changed. It's not about going abroad, it's going on an NCP. That's how embedded it has become for us.
Yeah. Good point to end on.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, definitely. Thank you all so much. And it's interesting to see how it'll change and how it'll continue to change. And study abroad, as it's described today, is very different than I was in school. It's no longer just touring around museums and drinking coffee at a nice cafe. It really is convincing parents. It's really very work focused. It's very academic professional goals focused. The changing nature of U.S. higher ed. It's no longer just 20-year-olds going out. Oh gosh, they're ending in a song. We have 80-year-old women going out and studying abroad, and that's great. There is no age that you stop learning or contributing. So that I will now turn it to Wes to end us in song.
I don't have a song. But no, just thank you guys so much for attending this session. Feel free to talk to us.
Country road.
Yeah.
Every international student knows that song.
Every person internationally. Heidi, I think this one's yours.
Thank you so much. Really interesting, I think. I had no idea about this person.
Yeah, and I forgot to make the link between, my point with the JC context is we're a tiny team. We're like one person that does that. You don't have to be a big institution to take advantage of these options, was the reason I was giving the context. Because we're not the highest ranked institution in the country getting all the students to go.
But it's nice that everybody gets to tap.
Yeah, it's a scholars program. Yeah.
Very level playing field.
She's at Charles Darwin. Yeah. I know a few Joannes, that's why I was on the website, so I'm pretty sure that our and I'm sure I'll distribute them to people, but you can easily just get the new one and it will show you the 2023, so we apply in 2022 to 2023, so it will show you the 2023 guidelines that close now.
Share the presentation.
And there's absolutely nothing to approaching for for example, that you would, say, did you write it down to the program? Because it's always most successful when there's true bilateral intention. So a lot of the time, Australian universities are trying to identify partners and where to go. And there's absolutely nothing that we can do. You can't put in the grant application, but every application needs to have a partner. So whether it's an industry partner or an institutional partner, every application links to a partner. So that's a good place to start. The guidelines are relatively digestible, like they're not really difficult to understand. So I would start there. Yeah, you're welcome.
How did it go? Did it go well, Wendy?
It did go really well, yeah.
Good.
Is there anything I can do to help you with the rest of the day?
No, you've helped enough. Thank you so much. Just enjoy yourself.
Yeah, it's been wonderful actually to
Good.
connect with everybody on a much smaller scale than NASA or
Yes. Yeah, the smaller conferences and summits are often. Yeah. We don't have anything formal this evening, but invite somebody out for drinks, go grab a dinner. Yeah, I'm sure there'll be a couple people. Yeah.
Unfortunately, the Australian day starts about lunchtime here, so still we have plenty going on.
Yes.
Into the evening.
But actually, It'll close, have it Tuesday application process. Yes, the first day.
You're queued up, Lyndon. Do you want to? Are you going first or?
I don't think we decided on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll take some photos.
Oh, thank you. Actually, my LinkedIn's like 5 years out of date, so that'd be good.
You need a new headshot. Yeah.
Don't look me up at LinkedIn.
Yeah. Maybe. Well, it doesn't matter. Whatever you got. Pablo, I just loaded his up too. Du Bois doesn't have one, so.
Yeah, I think Du Bois and I were talking about relatively similar things.
Okay. Yeah. Pablo was looking at yours, making sure he didn't repeat anything.
Yeah.
Everything's here. Just hit the button up here, and you should be good.
All right.
Yeah.
No worries.
Or present, and then just don't close out any of these ones.
Yeah.
Pablo's is here, and got the starting screen here.
What's Pablo?
He's just going to cover some ICEP stats and what we do. And, yeah. Okay.
Easy.
Easy peasy.
We
lemon
should rock,
squeezy.
paper, scissors. Alphabetical order.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Yeah.
You've all got.
See, since I've been here, we haven't.
Should be good.
Right.
Let me know if you need it.
Thank you.
I'll look it up.
Also, remembering from our conversation with the students, do you know our Justin Barnett? Did you meet him at Wellington? I'd like to put you because, I just learning about a whole bunch of things through Fulbright. So every time that happens, if you could just let us know, we can put it out and publicize it. Awesome. Yeah.
All right.
We're almost there.
Yeah, we're in this room, right?
Yes.
Okay. I will open us up. Lyndon,
Who are you making go first?
huh?
Who are you going to make go first?
Oh yeah, who wants to go first? But sorry, can you remind me of your title?
So I'm senior manager
Okay.
for global programs at Australian National University. No, I don't really know about
So there's 3 camps. Sorry about that. Thanks by the way for starting. Sorry. Thanks for starting. Oh yeah. Do you guys mind starting? Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Which one do you want to do first? I'm going to open it up and just say a few things about U.S. government's take on diversity, and then I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself.
As well as our largest outlet.
What you're doing on diversity.
So they can come and do that in 5 years.
You guys have a preference?
Yeah.
You have a presentation.
We do get some of those. Study abroad.
Sure. I have like 2 slides. I'm going to make your reference.
How about pronounce your last name?
Okay, think of it as UJOA.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, that's not the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, I mean,
To drop it.
spend a lot of
So,
time.
Venice is, I try to use it my natural.
Thanks for doing this, guys.
Thanks for the opportunity.
I'm going to run out and get water really quick.
Sure.
I'll be back.
Well, no, it's the second one. So it's China and then it's, so when you, and that's the combination. I mean, it's mostly that students from the overview side and then the student mobility study side. Maybe somebody has already
have a bit of a lingo interfere. Yeah.
I'll be curious because we always talk about
Oh, no, just that. Oh, yeah.
So it depends if they have
I got some. Thanks. Okay, that'd be great. You haven't really used it much the last few years, right? Because you're DC based, yeah? Out the state department building? Okay.
We're actually across so there's another show, the big one, and then we're actually right across the.
I used to do a lot of work for the state department. My whole life, so.
Oh, yeah? Yeah, with clearly not.
Well, it was ECA for like South Asia, so they were in the mothership.
Oh, yeah, that's not interesting.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, we used to be like over by this weekend. It was so Oh, I think it's just my bitterness is still there. Nice to meet you. Thank you so much.
Hey Wes.
Hey.
Just wanted to say hi. I'm Chris. I'm the international director at Massey.
Oh, cool.
But a neighbor of yours, originally from Ohio.
Oh, nice. Thank you. Let me give you my
I was in the Army in Virginia for a number of years.
Oh, yeah.
I've been through West Virginia like 8,000 times.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So you got 2 more years here?
I have 2 more years here. Yeah. Do you know any of our Education USA team, like Katie or Ron? Or anything?
I know Katie
Okay.
quite well.
Yeah.
I've only been at Massey for about a year.
Okay.
So before that.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, be in touch.
Yep.
Any
Next time I'm
ideas
in.
you have or anything you want to do? We work with Massey Coca quite a bit.
Yep.
Honestly, Coca's been the most of my Massey experience since I've been here.
They're pretty awesome.
Yeah.
They do some really cool things.
Yeah, and we've given them grants as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, any ideas you have or anything you want to do?
Okay.
We're here.
Very good. All right. Great to meet you.
Cool. Good to meet
Thanks,
you.
Wes.
There you go. So Nicole's not here. Oh, nice. Oh, when did you get to New Zealand?
Oh gosh, this is, tomorrow I just have some meetings and then Friday I got here 2 weeks ago.
Well and truly
Yeah, you know, funny thing, I didn't just not too badly because I landed early in the morning and my colleague picked me up, took me right into the office and I had a full day. And I went home and sat and I just got here.
It's a good plan to extend when it comes.
Yeah, I would think when everyone says, oh, it's harder on the way back. Yes, I think I'm Friday and Saturday.
I'm up for it. It's easier
Go ahead. All right, you guys ready? I think Pablo's right there. All right, we'll go ahead and get started if everyone's ready. Okay, hello everybody. Kia ora tatou. This is the Sustaining Inclusive Programs Across the Pacific session. Thank you for being here. Very excited. We have an amazing panel of gentlemen to speak to you today. And I'm really excited about this discussion to kind of close out some of our discussions for the day. I wanted to begin with just a little karakia, if that's okay with everyone. So I'll go ahead. Whakataka te ho ki te uru, whakataka te ho ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi aki ana te atakora, he tio, he huka, he ho hu, tihe, maori ora. Thank you, everybody. So my name is Wes Jeffers. I'm the Deputy Public Affairs Officer at the U.S. Embassy in Wellington. I've been in New Zealand a little over a year, and I'm very excited to be here today with these outstanding gentlemen to my left. I just want to give a super quick introduction for each, but they're going to introduce themselves more fully in just a moment. So directly to my left, we have Mr. Lyndon Isles, who is the Senior Manager for Global Programs at Australian National University. Next to him, we have Dubois Jennings, who's the Director of Engagement North America for Education New Zealand. And then, last but not least, we have Mr. Pablo Ulloa Perez, who's the Director of Member Relations, specifically members from Asia, Oceania, North and Central Europe, Ireland, UK, for ICEP. So we're here to talk about sustaining inclusive programs across the Pacific. But before I turn it over to these men, I just wanted to mention kind of what the U.S. government is doing on diversity and inclusion. Today, specifically, we want to kind of examine how we're building, sustaining, and deepening inclusivity of programs for students from Oceania and the United States. We want to talk about things like where are they going in terms of inclusivity, where do we hope that they go, any obstacles that are in the way, and any best practices that we might have to share. So with the Department of State, you might know that diversity and inclusion has not really been our forte in history. When you talk about U.S. diplomacy or U.S. diplomats, it's quite common to hear people say male, pale, and Yale, meaning that, you know, all diplomats were these white men that went to Ivy League universities, and that's kind of the people that we had representing us for a long time. It's also not lost on me that I'm a white man talking to you about this, telling you about diversity and inclusion. However, I have kind of my own diversity story. You know, I'm gay, and I mentioned earlier this morning that I'm from one of the most disadvantaged socioeconomic parts of the United States. So honestly, it's a little strange that you would meet me as a U.S. diplomat, but it's exciting. And I've been really excited just over the past few years to see that our diplomatic force in the United States is really changing. I mean, for me, the best part about the United States, and I fully admit, you know, we have a lot of obstacles and challenges in the United States. We have a lot of successes too, but through it all, the best part of the United States is our diversity. You know, you can meet anyone, anywhere in the United States and hear just an incredible story. You can do that in many, many countries, but it's, you know, being American, it's just what I love so much about the United States. And I really want overseas, when you meet an American, when you meet a U.S. diplomat, we should be representing the United States. You know, we should be very different sexualities, different religions from different places, different family situations. That's what you should be seeing. Those are the people you should be meeting. So just in the past few years, the U.S. Department of State especially has really caught on to this. Just last month in September, our Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, released a diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility kind of 5-year plan and strategy, We also have a chief diversity officer at the U.S. Department of State now who's been doing a lot of work in this arena. We also have diversity and inclusion councils at all of our embassies, including in New Zealand, where we kind of work to make sure we're prioritizing diversity and inclusion internally with our hiring, with our programs, but then also externally with the different programs that we're doing. And so, this is really important to us. Also, just a final point, diversity and inclusion and what we're doing on it is now included in our annual evaluations as well for all of our employees, both, U.S. diplomats and our local staff. So it's kind of at the heart of what we're doing, but it's really just been in the past few years that we've taken this seriously and we've made it a priority. So that's kind of my view from the U.S. government of what we've been doing. But we're here really to focus on education and where we're going with diversity and inclusion in education. And that's what I'm excited to hear about. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Lyndon first. If you could introduce yourself and talk about a bit about what you're doing in diversity and inclusion and where you hope to see it go. And then we'll go down the line. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you all today. I do have a PowerPoint slide or slide deck prepared, but just briefly, I'm going to be talking about obviously my own personal approach to inclusivity and diversity. And to give you some context, my background is actually in outdoor education. So my original degree was a Bachelor of Arts in Outdoor Education. Anyone from Australia, that was from La Trobe in Bendigo. At the time, was the only place in Australia to do that particular degree. And I started off taking students out into the bush, and there was a strong focus on experiential education. And it was there that I really established my understanding of that process and also my appreciation for the power of experiential education in terms of transforming participants in those particular programs, and also had a really solid foundation around leadership, risk assessment, program design, and I think most importantly to my presentation, facilitation of experiences based on that. And then I moved into higher education, and I've been in the learning abroad, as we would say in Australia, or the student mobility space. I counted it up yesterday, for just over 16 years now, which has gone by in the blink of an eye. And it's really wonderful for me to come and share my own perspective because I feel like it's, at least in Australia, it's relatively unique. I don't come from an administration background. I come from that education background. And so when we talk about inclusivity and diversity, our university is doing a lot in the space, but what we're particularly focusing on establishing as we move out of COVID is an opportunity to look at our actual programming and how our programming is being inclusive for all participants. So starting off here with a wonderful quote that I really love is that global education has the potential of creating spaces for learners to reimagine what's possible beyond these systems, including a deep sense of worth, belonging and respect for the self and community. And for me here, it's the potential that's really important in this particular quote, is that what we often see in terms of learning abroad programming, at least here in Australia, is that we have an opportunity and we go, we're going to do this, and then we go, how does this fit? How do we make it work? Who's it for? Rather than being really intentional in our programming around what is the outcome that we want, and then we work backwards and build from there. So I want to pose to you a few questions here. One is that travel may not be the answer. When I started in outdoor education, there was a huge focus on things being character building. We take people out in the environment, we put them through some trials and tribulations, we sit around in the rain at times, and that builds character. And the missing piece of that was, how does that happen? And can you guarantee it? And in what ways does this build character? And that kind of fell down. And when I moved into learning abroad, the same question was around, this is transformational. And we throw that around like it happens to everyone and in every situation. And it's a very specific process of how we actually provide a transformational opportunity for participants. And so sort of asking ourselves the question, if we want these outcomes, is travel the answer to achieve those outcomes? And especially when we talk about inclusivity, you know, we don't want international travel to be the holy grail. For us at ANU, we talk about international engagement and international engagement opportunities.
And that can take on a variety of forms, and one of those is international travel. But I think having that grounding purpose of what it is will allow you to define the work that you're doing. Rather than just saying, we need to send people overseas. It's why are you doing that? Why do you want them to go overseas? And the outcomes then become inclusive. And we've seen through COVID, virtual programming has become a really big thing now because of the access and equity and inclusion, and it can have really similar outcomes to an in-country program if it's designed from an intentional point of view and a background. So that's just the in-country learning is that the only way to provide these outcomes. How else could these outcomes be provided? And I think asking yourself these really critical questions means that when you're looking at developing your programs, they're going to be more robust. And the benefit of having robust programs means that you can really define what those outcomes are and you can articulate that to students. We've changed a lot of our thinking at ANU around the conversations that we have with students. We've moved to a return on investment model. And so a lot of our students that are underrepresented are from low socioeconomic backgrounds. They're time poor, they have family commitments, there are competing priorities. So if we want them to participate, we really need to demonstrate that there are real and valued benefits to that participation in the program, i.e. there's a return on their investment, not only financially but from time, and that they're going to be benefited from that participation. And that's, I think, sometimes a missing piece of the puzzle when we talk about inclusivity and engagement, is making sure that people know exactly what it is that's going to they're going to have from a program, and that we're providing the best program for them so they can make those tough choices. And oftentimes having a variety of programs as well, so that people can make a determination around it's not all in and virtual, it's not all in person, it may be a combination of both, it could be hybrid delivery, having opportunities that's both close and far from home. So the development process for us it's really important to make sure that we're consulting and including local experts and communities when developing our program, including when deciding on curriculum and learning outcomes. There's some really great research coming out of ANU and Canberra in particular, so shout out to where I'm from, that's specifically looking at the impact on host communities. So there's 2 PhD theses which are due to be released in the coming years. One specifically focused on the New Colombo Plan's impact on Indonesian communities, and the other one is a general one around communities for the University of Canberra around their health faculty. So they do a lot of engagement around nursing and allied health, and what's been the impact on the communities that host their students around clinics. And it's a really big part for us is to make sure that, yes, we're able to articulate great learning outcomes, but also to include the people that we're working with in developing that curriculum. So it's not just students who are included, but it's host communities, it's academics, it's our own students, around what it is that we're trying to achieve. We try and create and embed opportunities for local voices to be a focal point. So it's not just a group of ANU students. I'm sure we've all heard of bubble programs or islandisation. We travel around, but making sure that it's not an academic who's the centre of focal point of saying this is what you should know. It's we're here to learn from XYZ type of people. And also, again, coming back to that reflective component and critically analysing what are the voices that we are hearing in terms of our programming and who is missing. And a lot of times that's also around our student participation in programs. I think one of the challenges for anyone who was in the government grant session just before of our New Colombo plan is that we tend to create programs that the government wants, and then we go, who is this for? Rather than saying, or an academic could be like, I have a friend at the University of Tokyo, we're going to get together, we're going to apply for some funding. And they're not really saying this is a need from our students. So another way that we're trying to work is involving ourselves in our university's education committees and being able to sort of say to those groups around what is it that your degrees and your students need in terms of international engagement? Where do you see the gaps? Who needs to connect with who? What are the outcomes that you want in an ANU graduate? And then we're going to say, well, how do we achieve those? How do we provide the opportunities for the students? It's a big process. There's some tough questions, and it can be quite confronting at times to ask ourselves these, but it's very much very much worth it, especially with that question around who's it being designed for, whether it's not the academics, it shouldn't be the institutions that we're working with. Flowing on to my next slide would be also an acknowledgement that academic content of a program should not be the only consideration. We should be looking at, again, the power of the opportunity of taking people overseas and that experiential, the tight-knit group, the unique ways that those groups operate, and being able to look at things like group dynamics. So are you designing programs that takes advantage of those opportunities in terms of building really unique opportunities for students to engage and connect? And I think it was, as Nate mentioned earlier in his presentation, around having an opportunity to talk about how are we going to operate, and that's where that idea of respect came through. So being able to arm our academics with really interesting toolkits around how do you facilitate groups that's really specific for experiential education, around activity choice as well. So as much as we ask ourselves, well, who are the voices? Let's be really intentional around the activities. So the activities that we're choosing to do overseas, contributing to the outcomes that we want, or is it just something to do in that location because we need to fill time? And so really asking ourselves those really important questions. For me, I did my Bachelor of Arts in Outdoor Education. I then went on and did a Masters of Education, specialising in international education. And it was that transformative work that we were doing that really drove the research that I did during that degree. And I focused on the transformative potential of study abroad. And one thing that came out of that for me was looking at the transformative education pedagogy and the importance of embedding reflective practice to facilitate that transformation process. And it focuses on cognitive dissonance. And I think for any student participating in any program, they're going to come up against that cognitive dissonance as part of the program. And that's where we see the really valuable worldview changing light bulb moments that we all espouse in our marketing material. And students get up here and be like, my life was changed. And it was because of our ability to provide those cognitive dissonance opportunities. But the real danger for us in that is letting those opportunities speak for themselves. And grappling with cognitive dissonance is uncomfortable because it puts us in a space that we're not used to. And having directed, reflective opportunities is a way that we can be really intentional to allow students to transfer through that cognitive dissonance and change their worldview, and then again being able to articulate it. And so for us, we're looking at exploring for different facilitation methods and techniques. I guess the base level one of that is just letting the experience speak for themselves. There's some dangers in that, obviously, but we're grappling with isomorphic framing, we're looking at reflection and action, and we're looking at embedding that across all of our programming. We've been working on redeveloping our pre-departure, on-program and returnee programming in consultation with our Centre for Learning and Teaching to make sure that it's a pedagogically underpinned program that's centred in best practice, that provides these opportunities for students right from the word go, so that they're prepared to have this cognitive dissonance, reflection and action process throughout all of their programs. And we've designed that to be flexible so that it works for exchange, it'll work for our study tours, hopefully it'll work for international internships when we start rolling those back out as well. But looking at ways that we can embed that. Our pre-departure, we're moving away from just the logistical and we're developing what we would call appropriate front-loading opportunities within that. I know there was, Liliana was talking about, they run an orientation and a cultural workshop, and that sparked my idea around it would be great because it was the first time that I'd seen a psychological framework. If that was something that we had been given from that institution, we can embed that in pre-departure and work together to prepare our students to have a really great inclusive opportunity. So embedding these reflections or feedback loops, in terms of inclusivity and diversity, for us, what that enables is for all student voices to be heard. So it moves away from an academic telling the students again what it is that you're supposed to know, what it is that you're supposed to learn, and brings student voices to the forefront of the programming. Because everyone comes from it from a different point of view, from a different way of knowing, different cultural norms, and you're fostering that conversation amongst the group. So you're working on that sharing, they're connecting, And then you're also creating other opportunities for cognitive dissonance just through the ability to have these reflective practices. And that opens it up for students who may not see themselves in an academic program. If they can see that there's a pathway that they can bring their own background and their own viewpoint and essentially make a program what they want within the confines of the academic area of study, it's probably something that we're really driving for in terms of inclusivity, is having a lot of our student voices heard in terms of their academic conversations and the outcomes that we see from programs. And then lastly, just a call that one-off interventions do not affect change. And I think that's pretty key here as well, is that we're trying as an institution to look at it from a student life cycle point of view, not in a microcosm of this is the program that they're doing, these are the outcomes that we're going to see. So, we tend to think we'd like to have our students do 2 or 3 programs. So how does that programming work on that student journey? If they do an international internship, a semester abroad, and then they look at doing an academic short-term study tour, how are we making sure that there's opportunities for those students to have their voices heard in terms of the outcomes and what they want for their own future career prospects? So it's probably something for me, in my background, that I'm really passionate about, and I'm glad to hear that everyone else is focusing on this as well. It's key for me as well that this is just one aspect, and I think I'm focusing on it today because I think it's one that we tend to put aside in favour of other aspects around inclusivity. And what we see here is around including voices, not only students but our partners as well. We're focusing on programs that have worth. And it's programs that have worth, that have the great student outcomes, have great student feedback, and people tend to support in terms of long-term engagement. So even just through the process of that, we're really deepening our engagement with partners because we're working in a much more intentional way with them around, what are your areas of expertise? How does that work? How do we work together to make a great program? Who is it benefiting for? And so there's value beyond just a great program for us at ANU in terms of an approach like this to our particular programming. I know we're always on a bit of a time crunch, so I'll finish up there. Thank you for listening, and I'm going to pass it over to Du Bois.
Du Bois.
That was great. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Du Bois, toku ingoa. Ko Du Bois, toku ingoa. Ke te no au ki America, Virginia. Nā mihi nui kia koto, tēnā koto, tēnā koto, tēnā tātou katoa. Hello, my name is Du Bois Jennings. I'm Director of Engagement in North America for Education New Zealand. And diverse programs, and sorry, I don't have a slide deck, so you're just gonna have to listen to me talk. Hopefully I can make it engaging enough. But this topic is really close to my heart, both personally and professionally, and if you'll indulge me, I kind of want to take you on a journey of how I ended up here in this position because it directly relates to what inclusive programs, international programs look like. So I want to take you back to the early 2000s. Think about, flip phones, before any kind of social media, any of that stuff, and I was on my way to study abroad in London. I really wanted to go abroad, really wanted to go to Japan, but at my university, it was way too expensive, so I could go on a program to London where I would pay the same amount of money that I would a normal year. I went to a predominantly white institution called Skidmore College in upstate New York. And so I didn't know much about London, but I just wanted to get out of the country. All I knew about England, again, before social media and all of this stuff, were the old British mysteries my mom used to watch. So I thought England was just going to be a bunch of white people drinking tea. And that's what I went in expecting. And the very first thing I did when I arrived in London is my friend and I went to see a movie in Brixton, and there were black people everywhere. And black people who are like me, but not like me. And it just blew my mind. I wasn't, being in America for so long, I didn't think about, or I wasn't confronted with the Africa diaspora, what it looked like across the world. And this really interested me, and I had nobody to talk to about it. My program was all white students. The professor who came with us was white. His area of expertise was not sociology or anything like that. It was philosophy. So I'm going around and having these experiences and dying to talk to someone about it, and I can't. I'm also privileged enough, this program I went on, which was excellent, gave us a bunch of pounds of money to go to cultural events. So my friends were going to, the museum and the Globe and all those things, and I did that as well. But I was using this to go to concerts and see hip hop. There was a blend of hip hop, techno, and Caribbean music that I had never heard before. And this was blowing my mind. So these were my cultural events. And when I brought the receipts to our professor, he was like, Ministry of Sound, what? I said, it's a cultural event because this is my culture. This is the culture I'm interested in. So I had that experience. And then when I returned to the United States, and when I returned to college in my senior year, I was really grappling with, what is Black identity? In the face of seeing all of these different kinds of Black identity around the world and in the city of London, I was like, so what does that mean for me? What does that mean for Blackness? This was also the first time I went to a country and I was just seen as an American, not an African American, not a Black American. I was American first. So really kind of grappling and thinking about these concepts and ideas and what I saw. And I had, again, no kind of outlet, but lucky for me, I had an amazing advisor who was a scholar of Islam, and she took me on for an independent study where I looked at the Black identity through the Nation of Islam and American Islamic traditions. And unbeknownst to me at the time, this was my way of processing my experience and trying to think about Black identity in this new way. Well, fast forward a few years when I was lucky enough to get a job and teach in Japan for many years. And there, again, being converted with, I was American first before I was a Black American, and really thinking about my Black American identity while there and teaching very young children, which was really great. But I had the opportunity to work with an African American student who was studying abroad in Japan at the time at the university that was affiliated with my school. And his professor came to me and said, I have this student in my class who wants to do his research paper here on the Black experience in Japan. I said, please send him my way. So I met this student, talked with him, he interviewed me, and I was saying, boy, this would be really great to do as a full-time job. I love my little students, but having this interaction with a student who looks like me and has similar experiences, but is in an international context, how do I do this as a profession? Well, lucky enough, I learned of international education was a field and that I could get a degree in and all those things. So I returned to the United States and went to a school called SIT, the School for International Training in Brattleboro, Vermont. And I spent the year on campus learning about international education, how to build programs, but really focusing on access and equity in international education. I came to find out that Black students, particularly Black males, one of the lowest represented in study abroad. And I was like, how do I change that? What can I do? Who are the people in the field who are working on these kind of things? So I spent a lot of my coursework focusing on that. And then I had the luck of finding my graduate internship at another small, predominantly white liberal arts institution in upstate New York called Hamilton College. And I was brought to Hamilton College because there was a joint internship position created between their Diversity, Equity, Inclusion office and their international office. So that's one of the first points I want to make about diverse programs is who are your partners on campus? How are you partnering? You said it great. How are you partnering with the communities of these underrepresented students and really learning about what their specific needs and goals are, because we can't all be experts at everything. So I was really impressed that the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office and the International Office at Hamilton College were talking to each other. The reason why this program was created because students of color were coming back from study abroad programs having had really awful experiences. And they were confiding in, the student advisors and the people in the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion offices, the people they had close relationships with, not the international offices, not some of their faculty, but in these administrators, telling them the kind of horror stories that they had abroad, just their positions and ideas of how they were being treated, not being validated, being told that they're wrong and how they're interpreting things. Oh, you're coming from a US lens. We don't have racism here. That doesn't exist. Or even problems with host students, students in the host country. A lot of problems with other American students. That's what my colleague calls study abroad's dirty little secret, is how are we fostering community among the students who are traveling on these programs together? So all of these kind of issues were bubbling up, and the international office was like, well, what do we do about this? How? Because we know the study abroad advisors, we know the faculty, we can come to them and kind of tell them, you know, what these problems are. If we hear about these problems while in country, we can do things to fix it, to kind of salvage these experiences. But where do we even begin with that? Oh, let's get an intern from SIT. So luckily, I was the one who they selected. And what I did when I went in there was meet as many people as possible, meet, you know, the international office, the DEI office, but, you know, people who really had close relationships with the students to hear kind of what the student experience was about. And what I ended up landing on, due to my kind of workshop background at SIT, was developing a workshop series for underrepresented students once they returned from study abroad. And again, this goes back to the partnership thing, because having a close relationship with not just the DEI office, but the scholarships office. There's a New York State scholarship program, and they have offices at schools all over New York State. I became very close with them because they were serving the underrepresented students and the students from low socioeconomic backgrounds. So they were one of the first meetings I had. I explained to them what I wanted to do. They took me to their ice cream social that was welcoming students back to campus. There were a group of students who had been abroad that previous year, and they were lucky enough to invite me into that space and talking to students. And it was so great because many of the students said, oh my gosh, you're doing a re-entry thing? Like, yeah, I need to talk to you. I need to talk to you. I heard that so much. And I was like, okay, great, I'm on the right track. So I developed a series of workshops that focused on different aspects. You know, how is your culture perceived over there? Reacclimating to Hamilton campus, just all of these things. But these students taught me so much because I just listened to them. And I listened and I wrote down the things they were saying. And they had, like, these students were great because next to these really ugly and awful experiences, they were able to still saw the value in their experience, and they were grateful that they were given those opportunities. So collecting their information and data, I was able to take that to administration and say, hey, here are the things I discovered. But I also found, you know, through a consortia of universities, that other universities, when they heard what I was doing, they're like, oh, this is amazing. Can you come to our campus? Can you talk to our faculty and staff? Can you talk to our students and do these kinds of sessions? And to me, it didn't really seem like rocket science. I'm like, I'm just talking to them and listening to them and affirming what they're saying. So this really reinforced to me the value of listening to your target audience and really understanding them on their level and bringing spaces for them to tell you about their experiences, their goals, what have you, and really incorporating that into the program design if you're designing programs abroad. Unfortunately, this was on the back end, but we were able to collect that data, and we would change how we did pre-departure. We would change, you know, the ways students could contact people. And we also brought it to study abroad advisors, like, look, these were the experiences that these students are having. They're paying a lot of money to go on these programs. What are you going to do about it? I'm happy to say I was at a provider prior to this position. Providers are really stepping up their game and creating spaces for diverse students while in country, while studying abroad. So I've been able to slowly see a change in how programs are created or the support services put into programs to foster this. And then I'll fast forward a little bit more, and I've wound up here at Education New Zealand Manapo Kiteao, which has been a true privilege because a lot of the work we do in trying to foster diverse and inclusive programs, attract diverse students, really relates to this country's bicultural history and its founding document, Te Tiriti o Waitangi. This document really sets out obligations for the Crown government on how they are to engage with Maori, with the indigenous people here. And that trickles down into international education. So a letter of expectation was written by Minister Chris Hipkins, and then we have our Manakura, Chief Advisor Maori, and other Maori advisors at Education New Zealand who are developing a framework around this letter of expectations of how do we engage with Maori, but also bring Maori world values and culture to the world. We have an obligation. So I think some of my colleagues might cringe in the US when I introduce myself in Te Reo Maori and seeing that as cultural appropriation, but as a New Zealand government employee, I'm actually bound and required to do that, which is an honor and a privilege. And I'll just say, working in this space and working with my Maori advisors has really opened my mind up about what inclusive and diverse programs could look like. And what we're hearing, what we're constantly being told, and was still a learning curve for me, even given my background, is things need to be led and designed by Maori. If we're working in those spaces, if we're doing stuff, if we're trying to find programs or develop programs for them, my colleague said it this morning, it's probably best for us to give them the platform and for us to step back. They need to be setting the agendas. They have an idea of what their community's goals are, and they should be the ones designing it. One of my colleagues says consultation is actually an insult. Consultation is the lowest form of engagement. They need to be designing and leading. So at Education New Zealand, Manapoki Te Ao, that's what we're striving to do. We do virtual programs. I've only had this position mostly through COVID, so now I'm finally getting out in the world, but we've done virtual programs promoting Maori approach to education and leadership, and really putting Indigenous communities in touch with each other, but stepping back and not coming in with a prescribed kind of goal in it or setting the goals for them. They're coming up with what is of value, what do you want to connect with other Indigenous communities over. So for example, one of our most exciting ventures is we're trying to work with the National Science Foundation in the US. They're very interested in working with Indigenous researchers, and they oversee a number of Indigenous researchers at tribal colleges in the US, but our Maori counterparts over here saying, this is great, we know there's a lot of funding and stuff, but we need to set the research agenda. We don't want to be making programs or co-funded research that is the agenda of the National Science Foundation or Education New Zealand. So it's a learning process for us, but I'm going in with that kind of mindset and really talking to and consulting with our Chief Advisor Maori and our Maori strategists to make sure that we're doing things culturally appropriate and really letting them lead the way. And I gave a similar presentation to this to a bunch of US institutions, and I said, what could this look like on your campuses? How are you engaging with the communities that you want to serve? Are you including students, elders, and the community in the design processes of these programs? And if not, what would that look like? So as my colleague said in his presentation this morning, a lot of the concepts around their cultural values are really opposed to traditional academic Western, colonial ways of education. So I think we're at this point where a lot of people want to do this diversity and inclusion and all these kind of words and use the buzzwords, but if we really interrogate that and we want to work with people on their level, it's going to be stripping down a lot of the things that have been these kind of standards in education and international education, and reinterrogating, okay, who is this actually serving? Because we're being told by the American Indians we work with who have had international education experiences, yeah, I went on that program and it was really great, but study abroad is not designed for us. That's what we're hearing, and we're hearing it on this side too. So we're still in this learning process, and it's been a pleasure. This is the end of my trip, but getting to talk to Maori education providers here who are also exploring and want to build their kind of global engagement and global footprint on their terms. So I'm going to leave it right there, but looking forward to the conversation after. Thank you.
So this works. Buenas tardes, I think. It's 11, almost 11 in Washington, D.C., 11 p.m. now, of the day before. So. Buenas tardes a todas y todos. Pura vida. Kia ora. I'm originally from Costa Rica. My name is Pablo Ulloa Perez. Very well pronunciation, by the way, very good pronunciation. And I'm Director of Member Relations at ISEP, as it was mentioned before. Before I did this at a professional capacity, I promoted international education or helped facilitate international education as a volunteer coordinator, meaning unpaid coordinator, for 13 years. Following the program that I had participated in at a United World College, if anyone's familiar with that, in Norway, and making sure that students that wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to have that experience would have it, could have it. And I did that for 13 years and then decided, well, maybe I should start getting paid for this. So that's why I'm here. At ISEP, I would say I work, I kind of wear two hats, or three. Sometimes I wear a Pura Vida hat as well. And one has to do with our exchange model, which is our flagship model that ISEP has been known for 43 years, since it started as a study abroad program for Georgetown University. And it's the program that has allowed for thousands of students to participate in exchange study abroad programs in many countries under an affordable model. And for those of you that are not familiar with ISEP, particularly because our model requires that the host university provides the accommodation and meals. In my own experience, for instance, when I was in college, if I wanted to go back to Norway to do an exchange program or to do a semester of exchange, I would have had to cover the accommodation, which being Norway is not affordable. So I think that's one of the greatest, very simple but greatest values that value adds that ISEP brings to this industry, if you will, to this field. My other hat is sort of like on the business development side of things. So we also offer a portfolio of fee-paying study abroad, or what we call ISEP Direct programs, that help subsidize or help sustain the costs of the exchange operation, and ultimately goes back as a nonprofit that we are. So for me, I think as a Director of Member Relations, it's trying to keep a balance between making sure that exchange continues to be a priority for us, and this is for the organization, really not just for me, but also that we strengthen the fee-paying or the study abroad model as well. Now, in terms of inclusivity or inclusion, I guess I'll share a little bit about my own perspective, and the way I see it is in terms of the organizational culture, and I'm going to borrow sort of like a concept that Nate brought up earlier, not concept, but an idea, that you need the values to be there. You need everyone to have those values. You need institutional values to sustain that in the long term. And with those values, you could always list them, as I will here. Those are our values as an organization, but you also need to make sure that there is a commitment from everyone that works in the organization, and that there's intentionality. So I think it has to start there, and it has to start in a way with acknowledging the fact that sometimes there are gaps in the inclusivity or the inclusion at the organizational level, and that's for any organization. So perhaps we're not sometimes acknowledging the diversity that we have within the organization, the quieter voices in the organization. As an introvert, as an introverted extrovert, I I particularly feel that. And so making sure that really everyone in the organization, we have a structure, student-facing structure, we have a member relation structure that works with institutions, that everyone is committed to living those values and promoting them. As an organization, our values are diversity, inclusion, accessibility, affordability, collaboration, and quality. And most of those we are indeed able to accomplish, to achieve to a great extent through our exchange model, as I mentioned. And we are working to make sure as well that the study abroad opportunities portfolio is indeed more affordable to students that wouldn't otherwise be able to study in New Zealand or Australia, or in programs that or regions that typically will require or will demand a little bit more resources from the socioeconomic perspective, at least. So I think really investing in the organizational commitment and at the individual and organizational level is key to making sure that as employees, as staff, we when we talk to students, when we are identifying and making sure we promote diversity and inclusion, that we really believe in that and that we really understand it. In that sense, ISEP as an organization has invested in a number of initiatives internally. We have a diversity, we have an IDEA task force, inclusion, diversity, equity, accessibility task force, made up of staff from different departments. I am part of it. And my colleague Nicole Miner is the chair currently. We rotate. And that task force has done some amazing work internally and also externally in promoting scholarships, creating new scholarships that are result from the discussion that we're having internally and what we're hearing from students as well, which goes back to what has been said in many sessions here. We have to listen, we have to understand what students actually need or want. So in that sense, for ISEP, there is an investment internally in terms of the commitment, promoting and investing in the commitment, and then externally as well in promoting opportunities for students that are more tangible, if you will. These are some of the statistics that include some level of inclusion and diversity measurements. For ISEP, roughly speaking, for the last 5 years, Michael Alievich, who has been coordinating this summit, is the expert in this area, but I will mention, I will at least show this. And the main source of this data comes from student surveys. So what students are reporting, how they're identifying over the last 5 years or so. Of course, it would be ideal to have this number for the last 43 years, but we're working to have them for the next 43 years, at least, if not. Yeah, and this gives us a baseline, at least, on where we need to focus as an organization. And how we move strategically going forward. And because we're in the interest of time, I'll just put this there. The thought I had earlier. So money is not everything, of course, but of course, it certainly helps. After all, we did have to buy our ticket to get here and that. So how do we invest in inclusion as an organization, as a university? Even as individuals, and beyond the financial, the obvious financial resources, and for at least in terms of socioeconomic inclusion, of course, I should emphasize that providing scholarships, which is I think it's key, again, it's not everything, but without that, there isn't much you can achieve. But the other ways, it's like strategic partnerships. How do you promote programs that maybe don't fit, or programs that to provide opportunities for students that don't necessarily meet our more conventional or more traditional programming? And really a question for the audience and for you here. What are other ways of investing as an organization in inclusion that are not necessarily financial, that are, but yet will help us promote inclusion and diversity? And I think I'll end there to leave some room for questions. Gracias y pura vida.
All right, we're going to jump right into questions because we only have about 10 minutes, unfortunately. And those were amazing presentations. So please raise your hand, and I'm going to point at you. All right.
I always feel a little guilty asking a question, but everybody else raise their hand, so I'm going to go for it. For Linton and Du Bois specifically, because you both mentioned virtual programs and the role of virtual programs with access and inclusion. And I want to push on that just a little bit. I will agree, we saw through our critical language scholarship program, the outcomes were the same for virtual programs as they were for in-person. Language scored the same, so even cultural competency, quite similar. But it's interesting because, two other examples, for Gilman, we selected over 6,000 Gilmans in 2 years. We also offered them the opportunity to do virtual programs, understanding most of them couldn't go overseas. Less than 300 of them chose a virtual program because they really wanted that international experience, right? That's what they thought would benefit them the most. And the most people who did the virtual, they were largely internships. And it was funny because I was talking to some of the heads of 3 historically Black colleges and universities recently, and they were talking about their fears that virtual would be seen as good enough by their administrators and by students. That why do I need to go overseas? Because I can do virtual. So while many study abroad offices are fighting for their lives, at many colleges and universities, many in the United States are based on fees, of course, for study abroad. This is virtual equivalent, is a big conversation. So I'm just curious about your perspectives and that balance between virtual and in-person. That was a big question. I don't have the answer, so.
I'll jump in really quickly. Yeah, when COVID first started, I was kind of shocked at how quickly our field just went virtual. And everything was virtual, and we're kind of like, all right, we believe so much in this mission, and now are you saying we can just do this virtually? And there was a lot of conversation, particularly around, historically marginalized students. Is this going to widen the gap? Are they going to get the virtual and the affluent students get to go abroad? So, yeah, we were having a lot of those conversations, but I do think there's a place for virtual. Like presentation we did together with an American Indian student who did a Gilman to New Zealand, talked about a role perhaps virtual could play in, addressing if you want to do Indigenous to Indigenous exchange or you want to send an Indigenous student abroad, getting the elders or the communities in both places to have contact virtually first, because she said, we don't have a great track record in our community of sending our women or sending our little girls places. So really establishing that relationship first, there's a space I think that virtual could be used for, but as a coverall or as a replacement, no, absolutely not. But yeah, finding that balance I think is something we're all kind of struggling with right now.
I think it comes back to one of the points I was trying to make around, is travel a requirement for the outcome that you want? And if you're in a position where virtual could be a replacement for your international programming, then there's probably an opportunity to look at your international programming and be like, how is it so easily replicated and what aren't we taking advantage of in terms of the opportunities of being in country? Because that's part and parcel of being able to demonstrate what those outcomes are and being really intentional about utilising the opportunities in each particular space. Institutionally, at the Australian National University, we have a very similar, pathway in terms of incorporating virtual programs, and we're looking at much more deeper engagement with partners around the COIL space, so that collaborative online international learning,
having the opportunity for virtual to be a stepping stone or a pathway for students who may not have otherwise seen themselves as being part of that international engagement opportunity. So they form connections, and those connections are then hopefully likely to go on to an in-person engagement. And that particular model allows us to really leverage the best of both of those models of delivery. If anyone's interested, there's a really fantastic existing model the University of Canberra does around sports, entrepreneurship and media in that particular space of having a stepping stone. So I think in terms of the virtual being a replacement, I don't think so. I think for particular experiences, it's a great way to do it. But again, if you're in that space, you should really be looking at why is that so easily a replacement for your in-country programming.
I have so many questions, but I'm going to go with my most important first. Thank you all so much for that. It was a great way to end, and it's not easy to bring it home. My question is around engagement after the event. So you both spoke about it, Boyce and Lyndon, about the re-entry programs and even the on programs. So I think traditionally we've really struggled with engaging students when they return. They just kind of want to get on with life and they're done with us. I've seen some really great models, but I would love to hear some of what you're doing in that space to get that engagement and move it towards a truly transformative experience.
So for our particular model, it starts from the word go, and it's focused on developing a relationship with the students. And reflective practice, I'm sure we've all tried it at some point, takes practice. More on there, but reflection takes practice and it doesn't come naturally and normally to people, and so being able to introduce them to us and be able to walk them through, and part of our pre-departure is moving away from a didactic approach of just spewing information at students, and we value the time that we have with them. So we've got a blended delivery mode, we have online modules that are front-loading our in-person experience. And the in-person experience is centred around facilitating caseworks and models of engagement that we can really go to a much deeper level without having that front-loading experience. And so the idea is that the students are exposed to facilitation and reflection and working with us and seeing us as, I guess, mentors for their own experience. And then whilst they're on program, we're trying to be really creative with ways that are engaging with them. So using things that might already exist, like we run an Instagram photo competition, but actually being really intentional around what we're asking students to submit and embedding a reflective component within that. So it might be a photo of your community and tell us why this picture of your new community is meaningful to you. So using every opportunity that we have. And so the idea is that once we come back, they're so used to internally reflecting upon their story that the next way of being able to reflect upon their experience has been normalised. And so that a continuation of the engagement rather than a lot of pre-departure work around logistics, nothing in between, and then they're like, well, who are you? I'm not going to talk to you about what I've done. I'm not going to talk to you about the really traumatic experiences that we have or can have on exchange. And so trying to create, I guess, a safe space and a relationship that they're going to come to us to engage in that. And we work with a lot of areas around the university. We work with our careers. We work with our Indigenous Support Centre called Jabal Centre around making sure that it's appropriate for all of our students.
Yeah, just to add on that piece I think about fostering reflection really hits home with me, because in my workshops, the students, I was doing a lot of active listening and reflecting kind of things, and they're saying, wow, we don't do this. We're not taught how to do this. We're taught how to write. We're taught how to argue and talk. So I don't think that there's a lot of experience with that. And then reflection, even now with so much coming at us at once, I don't know how much these young people know the value of reflecting and what can happen there. So front-loading that is a wonderful idea. I'll just add to When I talked to the students at the ice cream social, they said they had a lot of stories to sell. When I told them I was doing this kind of re-entry thing, they were like, "Oh, okay." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm going to talk about culture shock and all these things." They're like, "Yeah." And then I said, "And I'm going to talk about how to leverage your experience to find a job." And I said, "Oh, I want to know about that." So thinking about the things that, Gen Z or whatever that they're really focused on, leveraging that. Hey, we're going to process your experience, all the touchy-feely stuff. So I kind of snuck that stuff in, but really sold them on. You developed so many skills while you were there that we need to talk about how you articulate those skills to help you find a career. That got more people into the door.
I can do one quick final question, if it's okay. Awesome.
And it's a comment and a question that to hear from all of you. Many of you may have some thoughts on this. I know that in our university we've had, particularly with our EEI officer, who now has an office in our building, in our new building, we had a lot of discussions a few years ago on the differences between diversity and inclusion and indigeneity. So I was really interested to hear you, Du Bois, talking about, referring to that, not in so many words, so maybe just some further reflection on you and from any of you really on how you view those differences. If you do.
There's a huge difference that I'm just learning about in this position, and I hear here in New Zealand that there's kind of, I don't know if backlash is too strong of a word, but this kind of tension about, biculturalism, which is a bicultural country, versus multiculturalism. Like, what does that mean? And diversity, I've even heard, there's a lot of varying opinions, but I've heard, diversity and indigeneity, you're talking about two different things. And it's interesting to hear too, with the Pacifica population here and Maori population, then really separating each other, really advocating for resources and attention to very different needs, because they're two different kinds of populations. So I think, as diversity kind of becomes a nebulous term in the US, we've pulled in all of these things. What is a diverse student? Athletes in the US are diverse in study abroad because they're underrepresented. So really interrogating, what this kind of term means and who we're actually talking about. I have a colleague who just says it straight up, I'm talking about Black people right now, or I'm talking about the LGBTQ community. So yeah, I think that's something to really think about as we progress this word. And that word is just in the zeitgeist now, used so much.
Awesome. I hate to cut us off, but it's almost time for the final closing remarks of the summit. So let's give these men a round of applause. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating in the session.